I spent 3 months planning a dinner that my own parents couldn't bother to show up for. That's the part that still catches in my throat when I think about it. Not the money I spent. Not the hours I put in. It's the fact that I sat at a table for 8 people, alone, for almost 40 minutes before I finally accepted what was happening. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name doesn't matter as much as the story does, but for context, I'm 32. I work as a registered nurse at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and I have been quietly, stubbornly building a life for myself since I was 22 years old with a nursing degree, a used Honda Civic, and exactly $400 in my checking account. I didn't come from money. My parents grew up working class. My dad drove trucks for 20-something years. My mom worked the front desk at a dental office. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. And when I got my first real job out of school, I told myself I was going to do things right. Save aggressively. Pay off my student loans early. And one day, celebrate with my family in a way that meant something. That day came on my dad's 60th birthday. I want to be clear about something before I go further. My dad and I have always been close. Or I thought we were. He taught me how to change a tire when I was 16. He drove 4 hours in the snow to help me move into my first apartment. He cried at my nursing school graduation, and I don't mean a little. I mean, he stood in the parking lot afterward and cried into my mom's shoulder while I pretended not to see, because I knew he'd be embarrassed if I made a thing of it. So when his 60th birthday came around this past February, I wanted to do something real. Something he'd actually remember. I booked a private dining room at Marcello's, which is this Italian restaurant downtown that's been there since 1987 and has actual white tablecloths and those little bread baskets with the rosemary butter that my dad has loved since the one time we went there for my parents' anniversary when I was maybe 12. I reserved it 2 months in advance. I put down a deposit. I coordinated with my mom to make sure the date worked, texted my brother, who lives about 40 minutes away in Westerville, and confirmed with my aunt and uncle who were driving in from Dayton. I ordered a custom cake from a bakery that does those hand-painted ones. I made a little photo booklet of pictures of my dad through the years, from his 20s all the way through now, and I had it printed and spiral-bound at the copy shop near my apartment. I also called my sister. That's where I should have paid more attention to the temperature in the room. My sister is 38. She's married to a guy named, and I'll be diplomatic here, a guy who has a lot of opinions and very few accomplishments to back them up. They live in a nice house in Dublin, which is a suburb outside Columbus, and the house is nice because my parents helped them with the down payment 3 years ago. My brother-in-law doesn't work full-time. He's been launching a business for going on 5 years now. My sister works in marketing and she does fine, but the lifestyle they project on social media, the vacations, the new SUV, the private school brochures for their kids, does not match what I know to be their actual situation. I don't say this to be mean. I say it because it's important context. When I called my sister to tell her about the dinner, her response was, "Oh, that's so sweet. We'll try to make it work. Not we'll be there. Not what can I bring. Try to make it work." I let it go. I assumed she'd figure it out. My parents knew. My aunt and uncle confirmed. My brother said he'd be there with his girlfriend. I went ahead and finalized the head count. The week of the dinner, I took an extra shift at the hospital to cover the cost of the private room without touching my savings. I want to say that because it matters. I didn't go into debt for this. I planned it, I budgeted for it, and I paid for it out of money I earned. I picked up my dad's cake the morning of the dinner and kept it in the break room refrigerator at work because I was doing a short shift that day and didn't want it sitting in my car. I got to Marcello's at 6 o'clock. The dinner reservation was at 6:30. The hostess showed me to the private room, which looked exactly as nice as I'd hoped. Round table, 8 chairs, little place cards I'd made myself with cardstock and a fine tip pen. The bread basket was already on the table. There was a small centerpiece I'd ordered. Nothing fancy, just some white tulips in a low vase because my dad always liked tulips, which I know sounds like a strange thing to know about your father, but he used to stop and look at them every spring when they bloomed in the neighbor's yard when we were kids. 6:30 came. My brother and his girlfriend walked in. My aunt and uncle arrived a few minutes later. The table had 6 people. Me, my brother, his girlfriend, my aunt, my uncle, and 1 empty chair for my brother-in-law, and 2 chairs that were supposed to be my parents. I texted my mom. "Hey, just wanted to make sure you found parking okay." No response. My brother looked at me. I looked at my phone. My uncle made a comment about how Columbus traffic on a Friday can be unpredictable. My aunt said something about how it was a beautiful table. I kept my face very neutral. At 6:50, my mom replied, "We're so sorry, honey. We're with your sister tonight. She had a bit of a hard week and really needed us. We'll celebrate with you and Dad another time. Love you." I read it twice. I want to describe exactly what that felt like, but I'm not sure I can do it in a way that fully lands. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness, not right away. It was more like that specific sensation of stepping off a curb you didn't realize was there. That split second of falling before you catch yourself. My brain just kind of stuttered. My sister had a hard week, and they went to her instead. My sister, whose husband doesn't work, whose lifestyle is subsidized by my parents' generosity, whose down payment on her Dublin house was written as a gift my parents told me wasn't a big deal when I mentioned it carefully one time. My sister, who said she'd try to make it work for my dad's 60th birthday dinner. Apparently, what a hard week meant, I would find out later, was that my brother-in-law had received a certified letter about an unpaid business debt and was stressed about it. That was the emergency. Not a health crisis. Not something dangerous. A letter. My parents, my dad, on his own birthday, went to hold my sister's hand while her husband dealt with consequences of his own financial decisions. I put my phone face down on the table. My brother had seen the text because I'd sort of turned the phone without thinking. He looked at me with this expression that I can only describe as careful. "Do you want to?" he started. "No," I said. "Let's just have dinner." And we did. I won't pretend it wasn't a strange evening. It was. My aunt kept the conversation moving, which I'm grateful for. She's always been good at that. My uncle told stories about my dad from when they were younger, which were funny and also kind of broke my heart. A little, because I'd planned for my dad to be there to hear them. My brother's girlfriend, who I'd only met a handful of times, was gracious and warm and kept refilling my water glass, which sounds small but which I noticed. We ate. The food was good. The bread was warm. The rosemary butter was exactly as I remembered. When the cake came out, my aunt sang happy birthday, even though my dad wasn't there, and I held it together until she did that, and then I had to excuse myself to the restroom for about 4 minutes. I stood at the sink in the Marcello's bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, and I thought about something my grandmother used to say. My dad's mom, who died when I was 27. She used to say that you don't show people who you are in the easy moments. You show them in the inconvenient ones. My parents showed me something that night. I wasn't ready to fully understand what to do with it yet. I paid the bill. I tipped well because the server had been excellent, and none of this was her fault. I boxed up most of the cake and gave it to my brother to take home. I drove back to my apartment, sat on my couch with the lights off for a while, and then I did something that surprised even me. I called my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt Bet. I don't know exactly why I called her. She's in her early 80s. We're not close in the traditional sense. I see her at Christmas and sometimes Easter. But she'd sent me a text earlier that week saying she'd seen on Facebook that my dad's birthday was coming up and that she was thinking of our family. And something about that text, just the warmth of it, the fact that she remembered, the fact that she reached out for no reason other than to say she was thinking of us, had stayed with me. She picked up on the second ring. I told her the whole thing. I didn't plan to. I thought I was calling just to chat. But she asked how the dinner went and I just told her. All of it. The text from my mom, the empty chairs, the rosemary butter, the bathroom. She listened without interrupting, which is a skill I have come to believe is genuinely rare in human beings. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sweetheart, I want to tell you something. And I want you to hear it without it sounding like criticism of your parents, because they are good people who are also making a mistake." I said, "Okay." She said, "Your mother and father have never learned how to be uncomfortable for someone they love. They go toward whichever child is the loudest, not the most deserving. the loudest. And your whole life, you've never been the loudest. That's not a flaw. It's actually one of the things that makes you remarkable. But it has cost you with them, and you need to decide what you want to do about that. I sat in the dark on my couch with my phone pressed to my ear and I thought, no one has ever said that to me that clearly before. We talked for almost 2 hours. Bet told me stories about my grandmother. Her sister, that I'd never heard. She told me about how my grandmother used to say that love is not the same thing as attention, and that sometimes you have to be very specific with people about what you need, because some people will never think to offer it on their own. She talked about her own kids, her own regrets, the ways her family had splintered and healed and splintered again over 70+ years. And at the end of the call, she said something I've thought about almost every day since. She said, "I'm going to send you something in the mail this week. It belonged to your grandmother. I've been meaning to give it to you for years, and I think now is the right time." 3 days later, I got a small package in the mail. Inside was a folded piece of stationery, the kind with flowers printed at the top, slightly yellowed, and a short letter. My grandmother had written it to Bet sometime in the early 1990s. In it, she described being proud of a woman in her life who worked quietly and consistently toward something good, and who was so often overlooked because she didn't make noise. My grandmother had written, "Quiet strength is still strength. Remind her of that." Bet had included a note of her own. It said, "She wrote this about me, but I think it belongs to you now." I sat at my kitchen table in Columbus, Ohio, 32 years old, and I read that letter 4 times, and something shifted. Not dramatically. Not in the way that makes for a clean story with a cathartic ending. But something settled in me, like furniture in a house, that's finally stopped shifting. I understood, maybe for the first time, that I had been waiting for my parents to see me the way my grandmother saw Bet, and that I had the power to stop waiting. I didn't send my mother an angry text. I didn't call my sister and tell her what I thought of her hard week. I didn't post anything on social media. What I did was make a decision, a quiet one, the kind I'm apparently good at, that I was going to be very deliberate going forward about what I gave and to whom and why. About 2 weeks later, my mom called to suggest we reschedule the birthday dinner. She said it casually, like a brunch that had been rained out. I said, "Mom, I need to tell you how that night made me feel." And I did. Calmly, clearly, without crying, which cost me something but which I think mattered. I told her I had put a significant amount of effort and money into something meaningful, and I had sat at that table with an empty chair for Dad on his actual birthday, and I felt like I had been shown, very directly, where I ranked. She got quiet. Then she said, "That's not fair." I said, "Which part?" Another long pause. And then, much more quietly, "What you're describing. That's not fair to you." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was something. It was the first time I felt like she actually heard me instead of managing me. My dad called that night. He sounded strange. A little raw, like he'd been doing some thinking of his own. He told me he hadn't known about the text my mom had sent. He'd assumed I'd been told in advance that they weren't coming. He'd assumed there had been some conversation that hadn't actually happened. "I should have called you that night," he said. "I know that." "Yeah," I said. "You should have." We stayed on the phone for about 20 minutes, mostly quiet, which sounds strange, but which is actually just how my dad and I have always communicated when things are real. He told me the photo booklet, which my brother had delivered, was sitting on his nightstand. He told me he'd looked through it twice. "The one of me at the lake," he said, "when you were about 9. Where'd you find that?" "Mom's old photo albums." I scanned it. He was quiet again. "I don't deserve that." "No," I said. "You probably don't. But I made it for you anyway. We're not fixed." I want to be honest about that. There is no moment where everything snaps back to how you wished it had always been. My sister still doesn't fully understand why I'm more reserved with her now. My brother-in-law is still dealing with financial problems that seem to never fully resolve. My parents still have the instinct to run toward whoever is most urgently demanding their attention. But I stopped being hurt by it in the same way. Because Bet sent me a letter that belonged to someone I loved, and it reminded me that being steady and quiet and consistent is not the same as being invisible. It just sometimes takes longer for people to look. My dad's actual birthday gift from me. The dinner, the cake, the photo book, ended up happening on a Saturday afternoon in March, about 6 weeks late, at my apartment. I made his favorite, which is honestly just my mom's lasagna recipe that I've been practicing for years and have almost perfected. I bought a small cake from the same bakery. My brother came. My aunt drove up from Dayton. My dad sat at my kitchen table and ate 2 full servings of lasagna, and then looked around the apartment and said, "You've done good with this place." It's not a dramatic compliment, but from my dad, it landed exactly the way it was supposed to. Bet couldn't make it. She doesn't drive long distances anymore, but she sent a card. Inside, in her careful, slightly shaky handwriting, she wrote, "Quiet strength is still strength. I thought you might need reminding again." I put it on the refrigerator where I can see it every morning. I think that's where it belongs.